Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of CEO Growth Talks. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. I'm Pete Hayes, one of the principals at Chief Outsiders, and it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Michael Waxman-Lenz. He's the CEO of American Technion Society. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you for having me.
Now, only the cleverest of us know what an American Technion Society is. Maybe we should start with the middle word, Technion. I think you have a great explanation for what Technion is. First of all, it's a major university in Israel, but go ahead and describe it to us.
Happy to do this. And Tom Friedman from the New York Times gave us the marketing slogan, the MIT of Israel, because it is the high-tech university in Israel supporting the startup nation. We always say that's an easy and the cheapest marketing slogan we've ever received, but it is even more for Israel than MIT may signify for the United States.
Yeah, because Israel has fewer universities, even though it's well known for its technological prowess. And they really do call it IIT, right? The Israel Institute of Technology.
Yes, although it's not used that much because then people think we're in India, because those
It's
tend to
about
be in
IIT
India.
in India.
So
Yeah, right.
exactly.
True. I am familiar with that. So what is an American Technion Society then? So that's the university. What is the society here in America?
We are an established entity that came about in the 1940s. So prior to the existence even of the state of Israel, in support of the university. And Technion has these type of societies around the world. And our mission is to support the university with their needs, with bringing people closer, and obviously also philanthropic support for the needs of the university.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And it's a very important cause. It's a very important contributor to global intelligence and global inventiveness and innovation. And yet it's odd to me that you're the CEO because of your background, because this is basically a philanthropic organization in respects. You're doing fundraising and development and you have your broader mission, but how did you get into this?
Sure. I'll say I have a little bit of a different as opposed to odd background, but I take it I do have a different professional, maybe even life background compared to many individuals leading or working in nonprofit organizations. First of all, I grew up in Europe. I came to the US for graduate school and met my wife and have been married happily for 33 years. So that's my personal story, how to come to the US in the first place. And I started my career in the corporate world. I worked for 27 years, as you alluded to, in different management functions, finance, started out in management consulting, went to venture capital, and ultimately ended up in the internet and tech world. Right before joining the American Technion Society about 7 years ago, I worked for an Israeli high-tech company. And so I was part of what we call the startup nation of the ecosystem. And I had the opportunity to become initially the chief financial officer. And after 2 years, the board made me the interim and ultimately the permanent CEO of the American Technion Society. So you're right, I have a different background than many of my colleagues and peers who may have gone through the ranks within nonprofit organizations.
Yes, thank you for redefining what odd means. It means highly, highly interesting and relevant. And so your management consulting, that was with Ernst& and Young, I believe. Yeah. And
Correct. Yeah.
were you running American greeting cards? That's a very different kind of business.
I was working with the internet and the digital division of
Digital side.
an old American icon, the American Greetings Corporation. And we joined the internet big time in the 2000s. And I worked there for 10 years, growing what was at the time one of the largest subscription services in this country, was more than 4 million subscribers. Remember, that was one of the largest at the
Wow,
time.
that's really big. So, and then you came to American Technion after your other stints in some other startup and
Mhm.
technology things. You started running operations for American Technion Society.
I was the chief financial officer, and the prior CEO brought me in because he was in the process of updating, changing the organization, which, as I mentioned earlier, was founded in the 1940s, was a very successful organization for decades. But a new CEO was brought in to make some changes, and we can obviously talk about how philanthropy is changing. And he was part of that change and brought me in, given my experience in finance and other IT related items, as opposed to my experience in nonprofits, which was really only sitting on boards of nonprofit organizations. I'd never worked professionally as a nonprofit.
So let's just jump right into that. What is changing in the business, if you will, of nonprofits? And as a result, what made you a fit? Because it was not perhaps an obvious choice. That's given that that's not where you had come from.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think there are a few misconceptions between for profit and nonprofit, right? Because most people only live in one of the worlds. There's a sense that they're so different. Yes, of course, the for profit world has a profit motive. There's a benchmark called profit or share price. And that doesn't exist for good reasons for a nonprofit. At the same time, if there's ever a perception that people in the nonprofit world don't work hard because they don't get a bonus, they don't get stock options, I think that is a misconception. Nonprofit staff and employees are incredibly motivated. I dare to say sometimes more than corporate employees, because they have a mission that they believe in, right? And so I think coming from the corporate world, there are certainly differences we can talk about, right? The language around product fit or metrics or KPIs are not necessarily the same lingo that you would hear in the nonprofit world, although I think it's getting there. But in general, nonprofits are about people, both on the staff side and in many businesses. I think in your own, it is many times about the people, right? The joke is that your best assets that are not on the balance sheet walk out every night. And so that is the one in the similarity, right? For us, almost 80% of our expense is headcount. And so people are no different in the for-profit world and in the nonprofit world. People want careers, they want satisfying experiences at work. And so those things are, from my experience, really not that different.
Did the organization then recognize that they needed to, I think you've used the term before, professionalize their approach or their operations at that point to bring you in?
Yeah, I would say our board, which is an amazing group of lay leaders, and maybe that is a difference from the for-profit world, right? A board member for a for-profit company or shareholders in general have a very different outlook and perspective than lay leaders for a nonprofit. And our board members were looking at the time, again, this started with my predecessor, what do we do in order to make sure that the American Technion Society can fulfill its mission on behalf of Technion in the long term, right? We have a proud history since 1940, but the environment is changing. When I was brought in as part of this new leadership team, we updated the organization. We had different experiences, right? I've been here 7 years. Not a single system that existed 7 years ago is around. And so we've updated the organization in terms of infrastructure. I'm reluctant sometimes to say the prior management was very successful. Nevertheless, we probably look a little bit different. There was a strategic plan established, which we're just finishing, and we're embarking on a new strategic planning process. So I would say part of it was bringing new blood into the organization and different perspectives, different experiences. And I think that's very important for all organizations. It doesn't matter whether nonprofit or for-profit.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You made a comment about the people side. And how have you dealt with different generations of people on your organization? Have you had to learn how to treat younger generations differently than folks that have been around the organization a while? How is that panning out?
Yes. First of all, it was great for me because I was in a tech company where the average age was 27. So I was one of the oldest in the company, and I joined here and I was on the younger side. So that makes you feel good. But, joking aside, right? Of course, when you have an organization with limited turnover, which is on one hand really, really great because that means people are satisfied.
Mhm.
But of course, age then goes up and you want that, I think, healthy mix, right? We have over the last 7 years, we have a very healthy mix of tenured people that carry the tradition, that have the knowledge. We haven't used the word relationships. Relationship is an incredibly important word for us. I think it's an important word for all organizations, but in particular for nonprofits. And relationships you don't build overnight. And so you need to be really mindful, especially with donors and others, that you don't have too much turnover, but at the same time, you want to refresh the organization, as I said earlier. So the people side, when I became CEO, I promoted the head of HR onto my senior team because I strongly believe as a CEO of an organization that is really about people, you need that person to have a phenomenal head of HR who I think supports us. Little did we know that when I became CEO that we would have COVID, we would have a crisis like October 7. And so I don't think I read the fine print of my contract. Having somebody who supports the organization, and there are always challenges with personal relationships and collaboration, and it's a work in progress, I think, forever.
Now, you mentioned, one of the advantages I think that you have as a nonprofit is inherently you're mission driven. How does that play out? Are your younger people? It seems like every business needs to be more conscious of that, especially younger generations are certainly seeking that. What have you learned? How can you compare that to your roles in other businesses?
I think you make an incredibly important point for the for-profit world. And I would say in this way, the nonprofit world has either an advantage or is ahead of its time because we are inherently mission driven. In our case, it is support of the Technion, which is an incredibly diverse university with 25% Israeli Arab students, 50% of a high tech university are female students. We love to compare us favorably with the MITs or other schools in the United States. And so that mission to support the university and Israel and global issues such as sustainability or cancer or other things. These are not Jewish issues. These are not Israeli issues. These are global issues that the university is working on. So that's inherently built into who we are. Companies, I think, as you hinted and pointed out, right, more and more have to look at what else am I giving to my staff members that is not just a financial reward, a career, a bonus, a stock option, right? I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but
Yes.
I think there's a younger generation coming, I would say, with my own children and with our staff members that deeply, deeply cares about something larger than themselves and maybe the immediate financial rewards alone.
Okay. Well, that sounds really useful. It's a great reminder. So tell me about your leadership style, Michael. How would you have described it previously, and has it changed since you've come into this role?
Usually I say it's like you are a marketer, your organization has an amazing cadre of chief marketing officers. I always say about the brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so I'd rather have others answer this question. My aspiration is, and that's sometimes not easy, and people know this, if you have a title like the CEO, you're not the first person people want to come and confide in. And so I say, half serious, I will be the last one to find out if something is wrong. And so you want to have, enough trust in an organization, in your people that people want to tell you bad news. At the same time, I'm clearly responsible. And I will give one example, which was very jarring, incredibly tough for everybody involved during COVID when our endowment suffered significantly, when fundraising fell by more than 50%, I let 30% of the staff go. And why do I give you this example? Not because I'm proud, but my leadership style is I do look at the facts. I do have a finance background. Maybe the corporate background does come in there more because I know I was one of the first executives of our type of organization who made very, very drastic and quick decisions because I wanted to secure the organization for the future. It's hard for us to remember how uncertain the COVID period was at the beginning. So part of my leadership style is certainly that I have learned when you need to make tough decisions, you make them. And ideally, you make them once and you move forward.
Mm.
And because then organization can come back together and heal, as opposed to being afraid there's more coming and another cut and another cut. I certainly learned that in the tech world, how difficult that is.
Well, I was just going to say, so what people that are listening to this, what they just wrote down was you want people to want to tell you bad news.
Correct.
How do you facilitate that?
I don't think there's a formula, right? The word trust is important. Ideally, you have a leadership team. I mentioned my head of HR. You have people around you who give you that truth, who tell you that, whether you like it or not. And I always say feedback, it doesn't mean that you always agree. It means you listen, you accept it, and you thank for it. And then you need to make your own determination. But the more senior you are, the more difficult that is. And I've both experienced it from my own roles as well as with other CEOs that I worked for. You need to be very careful. You say something and people think that was an order. And I don't give orders, but then you do that, right? That is a challenge I think that everybody in senior leadership organizations experiences. I perceive myself, I look at my staff, our colleagues, at people that I deeply value. I care for that they have a successful and career. By the way, sometimes that means people have to leave. We're a very small organization, and sometimes we cannot provide a career path. And people, I think, were shocked when I would say that. I don't want to lose a great employee, but I also care that people have one life. You need to make sure that you can accomplish and you can live the way you want. But we try to do the best that we can. My leadership style includes that I look at metrics. I was trained in the corporate world around, as I said, KPIs. We don't use these kind of things like key performance indicators the same way. And many times, a mission-driven organization, it's much harder to assess what is your impact. Of course, our donors all deserve and look for their impact. Why would you give your hard-earned money? You're looking to make a difference. How do you measure that? Is sometimes quite a bit harder than in the for-profit world. And I have those conversations with colleagues, right, in the for-profit world. So my leadership style, I think I deeply care about people. I enjoy working with people, but my job is also to make decisions that are right and important for the organization. And they may not feel good for certain individuals. They may sometimes look harsh, and you still have to make them. That's what we get engaged. That's what we get hired for. I'm being paid with donor money. The organization wants a long-term successful organization. And that's the spirit. At the same time, we want development. We have individual development goals for our staff. We do retreats. Generally, I don't believe that I have the answer. I may have opinions, but there are many people that are closer to a particular issue where I need to learn what is their perspective.
You're laying out a management style and approach that actually sounds very familiar for any kind of organization. What has changed for you? What did you have to learn over the last decade or so in your executive management career to pay more attention to?
I benefited incredibly from a boss for 12 years who cared about your development. And I don't tell this story very often, but he assigned a whole analytics department to me and came in maybe 3 months later and took it away and said, "You're failing." That's not a good moment in your life. 2 years later, he gave that department back to me and said, "We have this and this problem. There's a lead who's failing. You need to take it on, see whether you can turn him around." I've been put through, and I didn't get that at companies and organizations, like Ernst and Young. Sorry if that hurts the brand. I worked at American Greetings and at another corporation in Israel under this individual leader who really cared about your personal development as an executive and as a person. I've been given incredible opportunities managing marketing departments, sales departments, and I think that made me feel very comfortable with different types of challenges. I suspect my board hopefully valued and recognized this, and why I was moved from a CFO position to the CEO position. That's how you learn and grow. Sitting in a chair gives you a different perspective, and you have to learn. I've taken all the MBA classes and the executive training. Life is different when you have to make decisions, when you have to hurt people's feelings, when you have to decide between executives. The same way when you have to talk to a customer who's upset or a donor. These are just things you learn as you move through. I love managing people. I love working with people. As you may notice, I'm a fairly outgoing person, and I thrive on that. I don't sit in my office stewing. I try to learn. I miss being in the office. For those people, the post-COVID world is a different world.
I'm going to go back to one key word that you use multiple times: trust. Whether you're the CEO of a for-profit or nonprofit, your people are important. Establishing trust is important. What's the key to a CEO's ability or a CEO's capability in building a trusted senior executive team?
I think it is finding the right seat on the bus. This is a very difficult concept because we all learn over time which roles are appropriate for us, right? There's the famous Peter principle. You get promoted until you're one level too high beyond your abilities. I'm somebody, if I should have added that maybe to the management style, I'd like to give people chances. And if you fail with something, I'm actually, in general, I believe, again, you need to ask my staff and my colleagues, very forgiving if we fail with something. If we tried it professionally and tried it hard, but it didn't work, it's okay. Let's not make the same mistakes 2 or 3 times. The same applies for me to people. When I built my senior team, there was only one person left who was my peer under my predecessor. I made some tough choices. I let somebody go who was in the senior team. I built a team and I put some people into their roles that had never been at that level, because I felt with some support, they can grow into that role and it should work out. At the same time, people can have a stellar resume and turn out to be poor hires. I have a saying, 1/3 of all hires does not work out. Again, I'm sometimes scaring people with my sayings. That happens. And you still need to make decisions, hire people, and see whether they fit into the culture, whether they turn out to be what you expect, and they may not. You need to make changes, and that's hard. I would say they're incredibly talented people in the wrong seats in corporations or in organizations, because organizations are not willing to make a change once they're in a particular seat. And as I alluded to this example with my prior boss, he didn't have that. He was tough in this, right? When he felt you were not the right person, he'd take you out of the role. I think I'm not quite as hard there, but that is a challenge for many organizations, and especially smaller organizations. We used to say GE had great management, didn't turn out so well. If you have big companies like American Express or others, right, you have so many outlets to train people. If you're a small organization, it's harder.
And it's a different strategy to train people up or shift what their roles are. It's not just good for the individual, but the organization is going to get a whole different value stream from people.
Correct. And if you're okay, you asked a question earlier that we didn't drill deeper, how nonprofits or philanthropy change or is changing maybe. And I think that's another element. You may need to bring different skill sets in. From my perspective, nonprofits are becoming much more metric oriented. Why is that? Because the people who have the money today are more metric oriented. They want to see, right? Silicon Valley is the extreme. If you're running I don't want to advertise, a large tech company, right? You don't stop when you spend your
Yeah.
personal money thinking like you do during your day job. That has a big impact. There are trends like corporate executives don't have time anymore to be involved in nonprofits because the corporate world is tough. I've worked for companies owned by private equity firms, owned by or being publicly listed. You don't have as much flexibility as you may have had. I can only report back what I've heard 50, 60 years ago, where we didn't have that 24/7 world. We're constantly online, we're traveling all the time. That changes the work of nonprofits because you cannot get certain talent on your board. I can
Yeah.
mention maybe one or two other trends if permitted.
Give me one more and then we'll wrap this thing up. It's fantastic.
One big trend is there's a broad-based professionalization
Yeah.
because there are fewer donors, wealthier, that give more money. They have advisors. You do not have to be Bill Gates, right? People who have donor advised funds have taken control of their money and they drip it out over time. People who have funds have philanthropic advisors. They have even small family foundations. That is a change that I don't think has anything to do with our organizational environment, the Jewish community. This is a general trend that all nonprofits in the United States will have to address. You may need different skill sets, right? You may have analytics teams, which most and many nonprofits already have. You may have different people working with foundations versus with individual donors. That's what I meant with macro trends that are moving forward overall.
Yeah. And that level of rigor that the organization has to apply to themselves for the visibility to their donor base actually makes the organization run better anyway. Congratulations, Michael, with your work there at American Technion Society. Thank you for your insights. And it's been great chatting with you today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to CEO Growth Talks from Chief Outsiders. Take care. Thank you.